Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure. Is the volume all right, everybody in the back? Am I too loud, too? Okay, good. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be part of this leadership conference, and I'd like to thank NIAC for giving me this opportunity to talk with you today. This conference, roughly a week after Adoption Day, that started preparations for implementing the Iran nuclear agreement, comes at a time that brings the hope of a better tomorrow for the U.S., for Iran, and for U.S.-Iran relations. Groups like NIAC could play a significant role in helping us find our way going forward as we seek to chart a new course towards this better tomorrow. Now, having said that, I must add, however, that it must say something about my Persian language abilities, that even though I am the State Department's Persian language spokesman, and even though this is a crowd of largely Persian speakers, every time Trita and Reza ask me to talk to NIAC, they insist I do it in English. I have to be honest, as Khoda ke penhan nist, as shoma che penhan, it hurts a little. But I'm going to keep studying my Persian vocabulary cards, keep rewatching Dai John Napoleon, until one day, be omide khoda, you ask me to do this in Persian. In any case, I'm happy to be given the opportunity to speak with you today in any language. When I asked Trita and Reza what NIAC would like me to talk about today, they said that since this theme of the conference was 10 years after the nuclear deal, it might be useful were I to talk about where I thought U.S.-Iran relations could be moving in the next 10 years. I will certainly give answering that question my best shot, but in so doing, I'd also like to dwell a bit on what has changed recently in U.S.-Iran relations and what hasn't, as I think these factors will perhaps give some helpful insight into the larger question. Now, as it turns out, answering the questions of where U.S.-Iran relations are going in the next 10 years is fairly easy for me. I have been studying Iran in one form or another for about 30 years now. I spend hours each day reading Iranian newspapers and magazines, websites and blogs, and discussing Iran with informed Iranians and with experts. I've been fortunate enough to be a part of U.S. government policy discussions on Iran at the highest levels these last few years. So based on all this vast experience I've mentioned, here is my answer to the question of where U.S.-Iran relations are going in the next 10 years. I have no earthly idea. Because I'm the State Department's Persian language spokesperson, I'll say it in Persian. Man aslan nemidunam. But rather than ascribe my inability to answer this question to my own shortcomings, I would point out what I hope is already fairly obvious, which is that none of us can know what tomorrow may bring. This point seems to be especially true when it comes to contemporary Iran. The 1979 revolution was, in itself, to quote Charles Kurzman's excellent book, unthinkable. And subsequent Iranian history has proved no easier for anyone to divinate. So I can confess to you that all that my putative knowledge of Iran has brought me is a heaping dose of humility, a trait sometimes in short supply within the Beltway. I have arrived at the point described by the 10th century Persian poet Abu Shakur Balkhi, Ta be donja rasid danesh man ke bedonam hami ke nadonam. My knowledge has reached the point where I know nothing. Now, having said that, as another Persian poet, Ibn Yamin, wrote, Har ke nadonad va bedonad ke nadonad, langon kharakh khish be manzil beresonad. Anyone who doesn't know, but knows he doesn't know, limping will get his donkey home. So aware of the tentative and tenuous nature of any look forward, and armed with the requisite humility, I think it is worthwhile to talk about possible futures for the U.S.-Iran relationship. As a first step in so doing, let us remind ourselves of what the exact nature of the policy donkey is we're trying to limp home. In other words, What does the U.S. want the future of U.S.-Iran relations to be? First, let's clear away the misconception that the goal of U.S.-Iran policy is restoration of bilateral relations. Obviously, all things being equal, the U.S. would like good relations with all governments and would like all governments to have good relations with each other. But establishing a goal of U.S.-Iran policy to be restoration of relations mistakes a means for an end and does a disservice both to the Iranian and to the American people. Secondly, let's dispel the notion that going forward, U.S. concerns about Iran will be exclusively limited to implementing the nuclear agreement with Iran. Yes, this nuclear agreement, or if I may slip into Washington acronym, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, is a tremendously significant foreign policy accomplishment. And its full and faithful implementation will be of crucial importance as we go forward. As you are all well aware, the Secretary of State has recently appointed Ambassador Stephen Mull as lead coordinator for the Iran nuclear deal implementation, heading the U.S. government interagency effort to ensure the nuclear steps Iran committed to in the JCPOA are fully implemented and verified, and that we and our partners also are taking reciprocal action on sanctions. But, as we have been clear since the P5+1 Iran talks started, engagement with Iran on the nuclear issue and ongoing implementation of the JCPOA does not mean we will remain silent on other issues. We certainly didn't during the negotiations, and we won't going forward. We will continue to raise our concerns about human rights issues inside Iran, about the destabilizing nature of Iran's activities in the region, including Iran's support for Hamas, Hezbollah, and sectarian proxies, and of paramount concern to us about the detained U.S. citizens in Iran. We will do this because it is U.S. policy to seek to hold the Iranian government accountable for its actions, to seek an Iran that respects international norms and rules and abides by its international commitments, to seek an Iran that respects the basic human rights of its citizens, and to seek an Iran that plays a constructive regional role and does not fund and support violent groups seeking to destabilize and to destroy. Such an Iran will be better able to contribute to regional and global efforts to solve common problems. Such an Iran will be far more able to reach its full potential for its own future. And such an Iran will be better able to meet its own citizens' hopes and expectations. Now let us take a step back and take stock of what has changed in U.S.-Iran relations as a result of this recent nuclear agreement. We all know the troubled and turbulent history of U.S.-Iran relations since the 1979 revolution, a road that littered with the exploded and unexploded ordnance of mistrust, misperception, and missed opportunities for a better future. After almost 30 years of slogging down this road, one leading at best to a dead-end status quo and at worst to horrific conflict and carnage, President Obama came to office in 2008 with the goal of using diplomacy to solve the nuclear issue and to create a new path forward. Application of this principle, though, would prove no easy matter. Although there was an ongoing European-led nuclear negotiating process with Iran that the then Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Ambassador William Burns, had recently joined, the 2009 Iranian presidential election and the resulting widespread protests in Iran refocused Iran's priorities on suppression and on reestablishing domestic order, a prolonged and brutal process that led to many Iranians fleeing their homelands and many others winding up in its prisons. But the Obama administration worked with its allies and within the international community to create and strengthen a nuclear sanctions regime that would ultimately help induce Iran to return to the negotiating table. And here is an important point about the power of unity. As I read and as we heard in this NIAC conference literature, a theme of this conference is the Simorgh in Attar's wonderful work, Mantequl Tayr, the Conference of the Birds, where the 30 birds are able to achieve together what none of them can do individually. This is certainly the case regarding the success behind the efforts to reach a nuclear agreement. By working hard and working smart, this administration was better able to foster the shared realization, not just among its staunch allies, but also among the community of nations, that blocking Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon and ensuring the exclusively peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program was in the vital interest of all, and that the best way to do so was erecting and enforcing the resulting nuclear-related sanctions regime. Neither these actions by themselves nor diplomacy by itself would be sufficient, but together they would create conditions that would ultimately make the nuclear deal possible. Having said that, however, the path followed after the imposition and enforcement of these nuclear sanctions was neither easy nor inevitable. I was fortunate enough to be a member of the U.S. nuclear negotiating team since its start. And I can tell you that during those early times, coinciding roughly with the end of the second Ahmadinejad administration, the prospect of concluding successful negotiations with Iran seemed very, very bleak. At those times, under European Union's High Representative for Common Foreign and Security Policy, Javier Solana, and then later Baroness Ashton, it took months for the P5+1 in Iran to negotiate, even where we were going to meet to negotiate, as we bounced from Istanbul to Baghdad to Almaty to Russia. And when we did manage to infrequently meet, it consisted largely of a few plenary sessions where the P5+1 political directors and the then head of Iran's nuclear negotiating team, Dr. Saeed Jalili, the Supreme National Security Council Secretary, would just read set speeches to each other, but where little actual face-to-face negotiations was being done. But the 2013 presidential elections in Iran brought another needed turning point. When given the choice, the Iranian people voted for a way forward characterized by constructive interaction between Iran and the international community on the nuclear issue. We all know the history since then, starting with the September 2013 telephone call at the UN General Assembly between Presidents Obama and Rouhani, and meetings at the UN General Assembly between Secretaries Kerry and Zarif. And after September 2013, the pace of negotiations really picked up, with no more months of back and forth over where to meet. And when we did meet, no kabuki set-piece speeches, but rather an ongoing, almost endless series of serious and prolonged negotiations, both multilaterally and bilaterally, at the expert political director, and when needed, ministerial levels. It was clear all parties were serious in seeking a solution, even though it was never clear up till almost the last minute how or if we would get there. But we were able to arrive at the interim joint plan of action in Geneva in November 2013, then the Lausanne Understanding in April 2015, and finally the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in July 2015. So to my mind at least, the major recent change in U.S.-Iran relations is that during what Secretary Kerry has called 2 years of tough diplomacy, we have managed to arrive at a solution to a crisis that could easily have spun out of control, leading to a weakening of the global nuclear nonproliferation regime and possibly to other deeply abhorrent consequences. And even though we have not yet started to implement the JCPOA, we have already started to create a new history of establishing trust by each side having carried out its commitments under the interim joint plan of action, the JPOA, for almost 2 years. And just last week, Ambassador Tom Shannon and Ambassador Steve Mull represented the U.S. at the first meeting of the Joint Commission created by the JCPOA, which focused on ensuring that all participants remain on track for implementing the agreement. So in terms of what has changed, what we have now is at minimum proof of concept. We have shown that smart, tough diplomacy with Iran can work and can solve real problems. So if it can work on the nuclear issue, then theoretically at least, it can work on other issues. However, as the famous Swedish-Iranian botanist Carl Linnaeus wrote, or at least my Iranian friends tell me he was half Iranian, but they tend to say that about almost anybody famous, so yeah, anyway. In any event, what Linnaeus wrote was, Natura non facit saltum. Nature does not proceed by leaps. Although much has changed between the US and Iran, and although many taboos have been broken, unfortunately, much in the relationship remains unchanged. Although we have managed to find a solution via diplomacy to this one very, very important problem, to an extent it remains sui generis, a one-off, an exception, with little evidence as yet of any broader follow-on effects. Indeed, from the Iranian government side, it seems the tide of anti-Americanism has in no way receded, at least among some hardline elements who sought to scuttle the nuclear agreement and who fear increased interaction between Iran and the West. America is still routinely referred to by many within Iran's ruling elites as its main enemy, as the great Satan, as global arrogance, as mass-killing, blood-swilling, and world-devouring. And these are just some of the nicer things they said. Since the nuclear agreement, the Supreme Leader has repeatedly voiced his concern about any possible increase of influence, of American influence inside Iran, and has spoken out strongly against talks with the US on any issue other than the nuclear one. And on the American side, it is worth noting that even after implementation day, i.e. when all the parties start implementing the nuclear agreement, our own primary sanctions against Iran will by and large still remain in place. Why so little change? It is true that much of the tension between the US and Iran springs from mutual misunderstanding. This misunderstanding having arisen from prolonged lack of contact with resulting proliferation of simplistic stereotypes that were neither true nor useful as inputs to policy. Indeed, as one of the benefits of the hundreds of hours of multilateral and bilateral nuclear negotiations was the elimination of many of these stereotypes for all involved, so that all sides could better focus on the real issues on which there was fundamental disagreement. But one cannot ascribe all such tensions in the bilateral relationship to misunderstanding, when it is more the case that it arises from mutually incompatible strategic views and goals between Iran and the US. In other words, although with these nuclear negotiations we have established this proof of concept I referred to, it is clear today's Iran pursues many policies that are fundamentally antithetical, both to US policy and to the hopes for a better Iran that I mentioned earlier. For example, in Syria, Iran continues to support a dictator whose bloody disregard for the rights or even the lives of his own people have helped birth and sustain a violent extremist movement that threatens to destabilize the region. In the region as a whole, Iran continues to do, as the Persian saying goes, as "Ab gil alud mahi begire," to fish in troubled waters, using destabilizing activities to exploit and benefit from sectarian strife, rather than working with and within the international community to quell it. And in Iran itself, to quote from the State Department's most recent human rights report, there are still severe restrictions on civil liberties, including the freedoms of assembly, speech, religion, and press, limitations on the citizens' ability to change the government peacefully through free and fair elections, and disregard for the physical integrity of persons whom authorities arbitrarily and unlawfully detained, tortured, or killed. And in a related vein, I would not be remiss if I did not again refer to those US citizens still unjustly being held in Iran. And the US continues to call on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to immediately release Saeed Abedini, Amir Hekmati, and Jason Rezaian. and to work cooperatively with us to find Robert Levinson so they can all be safely reunited with their families as soon as possible. I started this talk stressing the need for humility, and I'd like to end it stressing the need for patience. While it is interesting to reflect on the future of U.S.-Iran relations, in the words of the Scottish Iranian philosopher and historian Thomas Carlyle, our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what clearly lies at hand. These days, in our often driven yet distracted culture, many want to binge watch through the current season of Iran-U.S. relations in the hope of seeing the next season of shows. With new surprises, new plot twists, and inshallah, a happy ending. But what I would say to you today is that by focusing on the work at hand today, we can help write the script for the next season and help draft the future's answer to the present's question. So in terms of the role of the U.S. government going forward, we will focus on ensuring full implementation of the JCPOA by all parties. We will focus on continuing to work within the international community so all parties, including Iran, play a constructive role in staunching the hemorrhaging of hope and potential from the wounds of the Middle East. And we will continue to shine a light on Iran's human rights abuses. Will we be successful? I have no earthly idea. Man aslan nemidunam. But in the words of Saadi, be rah bariye raftan beh az nishastan batil. Vagar mora nayabam be qadr vos bekusham. Striking out into the desert is better than sitting idly. And even if we don't reach our goal, we will try our hardest. So we, the U.S. government, are going to try our hardest to do the work at hand. Finally, I'd like to end where I started, talking about the role for organizations such as NIAC. As I hope I've made clear, with the conclusion of the nuclear agreement, the U.S. and Iran are entering new and uncharted waters, starting down a new path. And going forward, the Iranian American community has the unique potential to help guide all concerned. With your knowledge of both cultures and both peoples, Iranian Americans can play a key role in creating connections, building bridges, in explaining each culture to the other, and in bringing each nation's people closer to each other. It is my hope that the Iranian American community can find its moment at this historic time, work together, and help create a future for the U.S.-Iran relationship that best serves both countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Of course. Do we turn the mics on, or can you guys hear us? No, not yet. So, are these aren't on yet, are they? They are now. Great. Good. So we're going to do a Q&A now with Alan, and I'm hoping that Trito or somebody else in the front row can wave at me when we need to wrap things up, so I can not keep exactly. I don't want to keep Alan up here all day. Places to go, people to see.
I'm staying here all day.
You're staying here all day. Great. Accost the man. Accost him. But since I'm up here, I have the luxury of being able to ask the first question or two. So, starting out, first, thank you. That was great. And building off the thank you, you mentioned that patience is necessary. Couldn't agree more. You also mentioned that the possibility of a new beginning exists and highlighted the need to focus on implementing the deal. Now, when the Joint Commission meets and the U.S. and Iran have the opportunity to discuss priority number one, which is the nuclear issue, to what degree is that channel that now exists, that did not previously exist, between the United States and Iran, to what degree can it be used to at least perhaps exchange views on other issues? Is that possible?
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, first, I'd like to start off by thanking NIAC again and by thanking Reza and Trita. And before I answer the question, I hope I remember, talking about the nuclear negotiations, in every single round, Trita and Reza were a fixture, perhaps not in the room themselves, but in going to the lobby and seeing the reporters and seeing the analysts, it was like they were a part of the delegation, which was good, especially because when it came after the deal was done, NIAC and organizations like that played a crucial role in explaining the deal to the American people, to our elected representatives. So I'd like to thank Reza and Trina and everyone in the organization just for doing their homework so that they could play this. Really, I think, crucial important.
Thank you. And
I still remember the question. My answer is this. I think one of the reasons that the nuclear negotiations did so well, and were successful, was that we firewalled off the nuclear issue from other issues. There was a lot of stuff going on at the time. I mean, just to even mention one example, U.S.-Russia relations weren't at their peak, but still within the negotiations, we had a great working relationship with our Russian counterparts, and we were able to move forward because, to a large extent, we didn't link the nuclear issue to other issues. So I think going forward and implementing the deal, it would be a mistake to use the channels being created to implement the nuclear deal for other purposes. Having said that, as I said in my talk, that doesn't mean we can't seek to work and to reach out on other issues. You know, one of the again, things that happen become commonplace, and we're used to it now, but one of the most significant taboos was that it is now no longer the case that when American and Iranian diplomats speak to each other, it's front page, above the fold headline news. So, you know, inshallah, having broken this taboo, we can seek to work other issues that need to be addressed, but I think it's best to do it outside the nuclear channel.
Sure. No, that's great. And you know, building off of that, you know, we talk about U.S.-Iran relations, but the United States and Iran both have a set of interests within the Middle East that extend far beyond U.S.-Iran relations. And there's a lot going on in this part of the world, unfortunately. If you look at a map, Iran might be the only country, maybe there's one or two others, that isn't on fire, literally or figuratively, or both, at the moment. So my question to you, to what degree is the United States engaged in trying to get different actors in the region, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and others, to communicate with one another? Can the United States or U.S. allies, the European Union and others, can they help bridge the gap between the different parties in the region that aren't perhaps having the kinds of conversations that could be had or should be had?
Another good question, yeah. I mean, Secretary Kerry has said it, others have said it. Everyone realizes Iran's influence in the region and the potential constructive role Iran can play in help addressing those regional issues. As you yourself said, the region now needs the buy-in and needs the cooperation of all parties in the region. So, as I said, yes, the U.S. government would certainly welcome Iran playing a constructive, as opposed to the phrase we use now, as opposed to a destabilizing regional role. And yes, it's certainly true that discussion and communication between and among all the regional actors can't help but help.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's open it up.
So easier questions, hopefully.
Questions, hopefully.
My favorite beetle, my favorite color.
Absolutely. I've got some softballs if nobody else is raising their hand. Now, I see a lot of hands up. I'm going to try to get to all of you, but we're going to start in the front and work our way around. So, Ahmed, please. Do we have a microphone that's being set around? We do. Great. Now, I don't have to remind all of you that when we get to question and answer time, you have to ask a question.
Seriously. Don't set it up with 45 minutes of
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Oh. I was. Okay. I was going to comment about your Persian name, but I'm going to skip that because Reza said I shouldn't comment. But my question is, you mentioned that these negotiations were successful because of the firewall that you built between these negotiations and other issues. I assume one of those issues was Israel, that you could keep out of these negotiations. And how long do you think you can keep that firewall up? And is it going to affect the future of this deal or not?
Well, what I say we did, I mean, the only other issue we talked about was the fate of American citizens in detention. We mentioned that every time. We mentioned that every time we met with the Iranians. I get that. I'm just clarifying. No, but when I say that let me be a little clearer. I think focusing on the nuclear issue was a necessary but not sufficient condition for success. The mere fact that we just talked about the nuclear issue didn't ensure the success of the negotiations, but I think that had we started linking other issues, it would have been far more difficult to be successful. In terms of Israel, I mean, we negotiated or we consulted and kept in touch with all our allies during the whole process, both Wendy Sherman, both Secretary Kerry. We were discussing, with our Gulf allies all the time, because as I said in my speech, one of the reasons this worked was unity, and it was keeping in touch and sort of staying on the same path, both within the P5+1 and also outside in terms of the larger international community. So, I mean, I think you're right. There are other regional issues that certainly impact upon U.S.-Iran relations. One can't, as you said, address the issue of U.S.-Iran relations in a vacuum. And there are a whole host of almost intractable, unsolvable issues that will influence the course of U.S.-Iran relations going forward. And that also is going to require extensive consultations and discussions and communications so that collectively an answer can emerge from it. So I hope that answers your question somewhat. Okay.
We'll work down this way to Dr. Fatim.
Thank you very much for your talk. Reading your bio here, it says that you're the only person who holds the crystal ball in the U.S. government. So
I dropped it so long ago.
So I'd like for you to look into that ball and see if you can answer the following question. As we proceed to implement the agreement, do you see a point in time that the presidential candidates and in general some of the people who hold sway in the government are going to stop treating Iranians as persona non grata and refer to them as liars and otherwise derogatory terms that some of the presidential candidates have been referring to Iranians? Do you see a turning point at some point? When is that going to happen? And what can we do to maybe hasten that day?
One of the great things about this negotiation, or these negotiations, was that they were not derailed by comments from people from either political elite. I can't tell you how many times during the course of these negotiations somebody said something in Iran, either the Majlis or some military general, that ruffled feathers in our camp. And I assume the exact same thing is true, that there were innumerable times where comments that someone in the U.S. government or in one of the P5+1 governments said irritated Iranians. But as former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Wendy Sherman has said many times, we focused on what was going on inside the room. And so, yes, partly as a result of this lack of official contact for over 30 years, you're going to get a lot of statements that perhaps ontologically are suspect. You're going to get a lot of things that really, Luqman ra goftat adab as kiya bukhti as bi adabon. So you're going to get a lot of that. But there are also people expressing legitimate concerns. The key is increasing the frequency of communication. As I said, I saw a lot of misperceptions get broken and tossed aside as a result of these negotiations. So to the extent that that happens, and that the people inside the room, or just working policy on both sides, focus on the real areas of disagreement, then there will be progress and less chance for misunderstanding, I think.
Let's work our way around to, yeah, go ahead.
Merci. Mr. Eyre, first off, thank you for all the work you've done with the administration and bringing the JCPOA to where it is now. I know everyone in this room is thrilled that it's come to this point, and many folks have worked very hard to make it happen. You talked about this community in terms of building bridges between our families and friends here in the US and in Iran. Can you talk a little bit about how you envision those bridges and the nature of them?
Well, I think that's a great question. Part of it is just organizations like NIAC doing what they're doing, which is because of your superior knowledge of both cultures, you can sort of tafsir, you can explain each to the other, help do away with these misperceptions, so that if someone says something that really doesn't help move the conversation forward, this community can say, well, here's the reality. So whether it's informally in terms of the conversations between Iranian Americans and their families and friends back in Iran, or whether it's more formally in terms of creating programs and that increase the flow of communication between our two cultures, or whether it's track two diplomacy, there are innumerable ways, I think, that the Iranian community can play a key role. And again, to be honest, in my personal opinion, up until recently, the Iranian American community has in many ways been punching below its weight. You have such a tremendous potential that if it is used to the fullest, my hopes for a better bilateral relation go way up. There's so much that this community can do to sort of just patch the wounds and show the way forward, that if in fact everyone pulls together, not just on Nowruz once a year, at the park, but year round, then I'm very, very bullish. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we've done a lot of front row. Let's move a little bit closer to the back. I see a gentleman with his hand up all the way in the back. I see you. I didn't forget about you guys in the back.
Thanks for the talk.
Welcome.
And I have two questions. The first one, easy one. If and when the relation between Iran and the U.S. is improved, which Iranian city will be the first city that you like to visit?
Great question.
Good question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Okay. And the real question.
The real question. That's the fake one. Now we get to the real one.
Go ahead and answer that first. Okay. The question is that the negotiation is personal dependent or policy dependent. What I mean is that when Mr. President leaves and Mr. Kerry leaves, do you think the negotiation will continue, or it was person dependent, it's not policy dependent?
Great question. First of all, let me explain a little trick to you. I learned this during the negotiations when reporters would ask questions, because they'd be limited to one question. So if they had 5 questions, they wouldn't say, I have 5 questions. They'd say, I have a 5-part question. And the 5 parts would have nothing to do with each other.
And he's not encouraging you to do this, by the way.
Yeah, so anyway, you don't have 2 questions, you have a 2-part question. I tell you, the city I would like to visit first, again, this is, if it ever happens, Khuda is Tahanat Bishnave, is Tehran, just because just because I have, again, it's all been a hobby for me, but just studying, I've been fascinated by the history of Tehran, by Tehran municipality. As we know now, with the 1979 revolution, Iran was 70% rural, 30 urban. Now that's flipped. So the role of cities and urban problems in Iran fascinate me. How the municipalities try to solve these problems. For example, they get no funding, so they have to do terakom furushi. They have to sell municipal airspace, the Tehran municipality, to fund, its own budget. Fascinating. So things like water, garbage removal. The garbage dump in Kharzak is full. So what do you do with the garbage? Municipal interests like that really fascinate me. So I'd like to visit all the cities, and I'd like to go to everywhere, but I'll start off in Tehran. The second question was personality versus policy. I got to be honest, and this is a great question. Personality helps, but I think it's policy. These negotiations succeeded, in my opinion, not because Dr. Zarif, was a better negotiator than Dr. Jalili. I think that Dr. Jalili did what he was told to do. I think that Wendy Sherman and Bill Burns did what they were told to do. I certainly did what I was told to do, as did Dr. Zarif. So yes, it certainly helped that he speaks fluent English. It certainly helps that he could go on U.S. media and explain Iran's positions and policies. But I don't think success of the negotiations was dependent on any single personality. I think it was dependent on, here's the key word, niyat, intention. I think all sides had intention to get this done. Even when we didn't see a way forward, even when it just seemed we're hitting our head against the same wall, no one walked away. We stepped back, took our breath, mutual respect, goodwill, and we just tried again the next day or later that night, as it often turned out.
Let's go. Tahim and Moqtadir. Moving on to the back rows. We're gonna work all the way around. Don't worry.
I don't know who it is.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre, for being here. This is a great conference. My question to you, you just mentioned about the negotiating team. If you noticed that the new negotiating team were all Western graduates, where the former negotiating team during the Ahmadinejad were not so. So how important do you think it is for the State Department to allow more Iranian students to come to the United States to get a good education in this country?
One more.
Great question. I will point out, though, that Dr. Abbas Arakchi was a member of the negotiations, both teams. So he was there the whole time. But, oh my goodness, yes. I think that the higher we could boost the numbers of people, not just students coming here to study, Iranians coming here to visit, the better. And the numbers have gone up. I don't have them at hand, but I was talking to our colleagues in consular affairs just the other day, and the numbers are going up like this every year of Iranians coming to study. So, yeah, obviously, I think, again, just in terms of increasing mutual understanding, it's fantastic to get Iranians over here. And we're going to keep trying to find ways to make it easier for that. We all have heard stories of problems Iranian students have had with visas. I have to tell you, as the State Department Persian language spokesperson, I get these every day, and they break your heart. Now, I realize that that's the part of the elephant I'm touching. It isn't representative of the whole. The vast majority of people seeking visas, Iranians seeking visas, it goes smoothly without any problems. So I'm only hearing it when things go off the rails. But I think the more we can facilitate and encourage Iranian students coming here and going to our universities, the better. And we're going to keep trying to do that.
So I can take one more question. And before I take the last question, I just want to say that I'm sure all of you have amazing questions. If I don't call on you, it's not because I don't like you. And he will be here.
I'll be here, yeah.
So by all means, it's not the same as the White House lady last year giving out her email address, but you can ask him. Maybe he'll give it to you. You never know.
I will be here today and tomorrow, so.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I saw you patiently raising your hand. So right back here in the middle, this nice young lady right here. There you go.
As opposed to impatiently waving her.
Hi, thank you so much for all the hard work that you
Have
put into the deal. My question is that so far the signals that we're getting is that U.S. companies, because of the law, but also just the direction that they're getting from the administration, they won't meet necessarily with Iranian officials, not to actually make any contracts, but to evaluate because they're worried. Given that implementation day hasn't happened yet, do you think that will change once implementation happens? Or do you think going forward, that's going to be the kind of signal that the administration will give to US companies? Thank you.
Good question. Mazarat Mikham, but I have to not agree with part of the premise of your question, which is that in some way the US government is foot dragging in terms of either getting ready for implementation or if it does happen, inshallah, implementing the deal. We're not. The US government is committed to fully and faithfully implementing the JCPOA, to acting out its commitments, not just because it's the right thing to do, but from a practical point of view, we need Iran to want to live up to its commitments. And they'll do that. So everyone within the US government, at every step, both before implementation and God willing, if we get to implementation or when we get to implementation, once that goes forward, we are going to do, and this is one of the reasons why when we were drafting the JCPOA, we didn't want to leave any room for interpretation. You know, look at the JPOA, it's a small document. Look at the JCPOA with its annexes. It's a big, hefty document with annexes. Why? Because we wanted everyone to be really, really clear about what each side was going to do and what each side was not going to do. So every entity within the executive branch, State Department, Treasury, within Treasury, OFAC, we are going to do everything we can to implement the deal because we know that's the best way of it working.
It pains me to have to bring this to a close, but I do. And I want to thank Alan, not just for everything that he said, but also specifically because I don't know if any of you have seen House of Cards. Well, there was a British version before the American version came out. And the British version, the main character always says, you might think that I couldn't possibly comment.
I'd love to say that.
And as would I, but you didn't. So we thank you for candidly answering the questions as best you could. We thank you for joining us and helping us kick things off. Everybody join me in giving Alan a round of applause.
Thank you all. That's all. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.